We're thrilled to have Giles Keating with us today. He's on the board of Bitcoin Suisse and former head of global research at Credit Suisse. And we've invited Giles to speak to us today about the current market sentiment, what is happening in markets right now with the Dow having crossed 30,000 for the first time ever, an all-time high. At the same time, bond yields in general still being incredibly low. What does all this mean, Giles?
Well, clearly there's a mixture going on here. There's obviously optimism about vaccines helping the world economy to recover once we're through what looks like a pretty difficult winter in the Northern Hemisphere. Also, clearly monetary policy is seen as very accommodating at the moment and probably getting even a little bit more accommodating as we go forward. And there's also a sense that fiscal support, although it's run into roadblocks of slightly different types in both Europe and America, there's a sense of more fiscal support. So I think if you put all that together, that is obviously helping underpin markets, despite the fact that the short-term economic news is actually not good. And we could well see economies pretty weak over the next perhaps 2-3 months.
Is this what has been driving yields lower? So bond prices higher, this uncertainty?
The way I'd see bond yields, I mean, obviously they have been significantly lower than they were now. Then they moved up a little bit. The US 10-year, tried to break through 1%, for example, but didn't succeed. It's now hovering a bit below that. And I think basically bond yields are reacting to the idea that the central banks are going to stay very accommodating as we go forward for certainly a long time to come.
You spoke about vaccines. What is your view on the outlook for all the positive news we've heard about the vaccine and the efficacy of the vaccines? Is it hype or can we rely on that? Good news.
I think we can be fairly reliant on that. Obviously, we have now seen the later stage clinical trial results, which are starting to look pretty good now for 3 vaccines with 4 if you depending on where you stop. And I think that's looking pretty good. The kind of estimates that look fairly credible to me are suggesting that we could see as many as 800 million doses delivered by mid-year worldwide and rising still quite steeply beyond that. That obviously doesn't cover everyone in the world, but that's a very good beginning.
It's a good step in the direction of achieving a degree of herd immunity, absolutely.
Well, now, I think in the Western world, that probably will mean herd immunity, and in a significant number of other countries increasing all the time.
Very interesting. So, and let's quickly talk about valuation. The fact that stock markets have just gone up and up and up, despite the economic recession that the real economy is going through, means valuations have become really, really high, both in terms of stock prices and publicly traded bond markets. Where does one invest in that context?
I think you can expand your investment universe. I think that's worth doing at any time, to be honest, but it's certainly now worth looking at alternative investments. It will always be good as a general principle to have a broader range of investments in your portfolio rather than a narrower range.
And so what are alternatives? This investment class seems to be growing and growing. What would you include under alternative investments?
There's no formal definition. I'm sure if you can look on various sources, he'll try and give you a formal one. But it's a range of assets. Some people would even include things like commodities, general real estate. Certainly, I think we can include, we can begin now to look at some of the cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin and so on. Some people would say you look at privately denominated assets, those not traded on public exchanges, which can include, of course, both equity and debt instruments, and indeed often mezzanine instruments that kind of are part of the way between those two classes. So I think there are a range of assets that we can look at here. Some people would add in hedge funds to that, not least because those can be a route through to some of the assets I've mentioned. And they can also perhaps be a convenient way to get access to certain derivative strategies, which may otherwise be difficult to reach.
So you speak also about Bitcoin. Now, Bitcoin is also an interesting animal, not least because it just crossed the 19,000 barrier. So it's close or at an all-time high again. What's different about this rally? What's driving it higher as well?
I think what is different now compared to when we were previously around these levels is that you're now seeing a lot of institutional interest. You're now seeing, for example, family offices investing. You're seeing some quite big, well-known investment names, whereas before it was many retail investors, and I think those had to be regarded as perhaps less stable in their attitude to holding Bitcoin. And there is another really important difference, which is that at this very moment, we are seeing the arrival of, if you like, an actual rate of return on some cryptocurrencies. You can go out today with a cryptocurrency like Polkadot, and actually get a rate of return nudging into double digits. Ethereum, which is the second biggest cryptocurrency after Bitcoin, the same is just happening with that as well. Now, Bitcoin itself doesn't have a yield, but those other cryptos do, and Bitcoin is kind of part of that ecosystem. In some ways, it's the leader of it. By the way, that yield is not wholly without risk. It's through a process called staking, but nevertheless, I think it's very attractive to some investors.
So would you consider the cryptocurrencies as a credible alternative asset to mainstream investors, or are we not there yet?
I think they are now a credible alternative asset. Let's be blunt about it. They're very volatile. But then so also are some traditional alternative assets. I have in mind commodities, including gold, which is also very volatile. And I think one of the nice things is that at least at the moment, the cryptocurrencies are something that most of the time, maybe not absolutely all of the time, but most of the time, it is possible to trade in and out of them. And that's a kind of an added advantage. So yes, I think they are now part of that universe, but people need to be very cautious and only hold them, of course, as one element in a much broader portfolio.
Last question, Giles. At 19,000, would you be a buyer of Bitcoin?
Very much so, yes. And indeed, I have been adding some into my portfolio. And that is because I do see that long-term potential. And I do see it really, that whole cryptocurrency world, of which it really is at the heart, as continuing to grow. The central banks are now involved in this area. Of course, they are going to be issuing crypto versions of their own currencies, crypto Swiss franc, crypto whatever else. But as they become involved, then that provides a link through to the world of Bitcoin and the other cryptos, which I think, again, just adds to that momentum.
Thank you, Giles. Lovely speaking to you as always, and wish you a wonderful weekend.